Tejon Ranch covers 270,000 acres of California, the largest contiguous private landholding in the state, and on paper, it belongs to no single family, no dynasty, no name you would recognize from a deed. A publicly traded company holds it now, with a rotating roster of institutional investors and hedge funds, none of whom appear on a county assessor record for the land itself. And that company traces its title back, without interruption, to 4 Mexican land grants issued before California joined the United States. That is not a rhetorical device. That is the actual chain of title. Start with the land itself. Quitanamuk. People lived across much of this territory for centuries before European contact, and it was their homeland that the Mexican government carved into grants during the Rancho period of California history. Between 1843 and 1846, the Mexican government issued 4 grants across what is now Southern California. Rancho El Tejon, at roughly 97,000 acres. Rancho Los Alamos y Agua Caliente, at about 26,600. Rancho Castac, at around 22,000. And Rancho La Liebre, at approximately 48,800 acres. The intention was colonization, and the method was handing enormous tracts to private individuals. Taken together, these 4 parcels stretch from the southern San Joaquin Valley through the Tehachapi Mountains and into the Antelope Valley. Interstate 5 now cuts straight through the property, and so do 17 miles of California's state water project, including the largest pumping plant in the entire system. Then the United States took California. The 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo guaranteed the property rights of existing landholders, but the California Land Act of 1851 required every claimant to prove their grant before a federal commission, a process that dragged on for years and consumed money that many rancheros simply did not have. Across California, families paid legal fees with acreage, settled debts with deeds, and watched their holdings shrink through the cost of defending them. Edward Fitzgerald Beale moved in the opposite direction entirely. Beale was the naval officer who personally carried the first gold samples east to confirm the California discovery in 1848, and he later served as Superintendent of Indian Affairs for California and Nevada, a role that brought him directly into the territory he would come to own. Between 1855 and 1866, he acquired all 4 ranchos, consolidating them into a single holding. The federal government also established Fort Tejon on a portion of the land in 1854, a United States Army post that operated until 1864 and now stands as a California State Historic Park. And the short-lived Sebastian Indian Reservation was located nearby during the same period. In May 1863, President Lincoln's secretary affixed Lincoln's signature to a deed confirming the original grantee's title to Rancho El Tejon, nearly 2 decades after the Mexican government had first issued the grant. Beale held the consolidated estate until his passing in 1893, at which point it transferred to his son, Truxton. So, by the early 20th century, 270,000 contiguous acres sat under one family's control, assembled from 4 separate grants, validated by the federal government, intact. That is where most stories of this kind would end. This one did not. In 1912, the Beale family sold Tejon Ranch for approximately $3 million, and the buyer was not one person. A 70-member investor syndicate led by Harry Chandler, publisher of the Los Angeles Times, who would later become, by some accounts, the largest private landowner in the United States, and Moses Sherman, a prominent Southern California land developer, structured the purchase with $1.5 million in cash and the remainder financed. Among the named participants were Marion Otis Chandler, Hobart Whitley, and Leslie Brand. Within 4 years, the venture teetered on the edge of foreclosure when investors failed to meet their promissory notes, forcing Chandler and Sherman to personally buy out the mortgage and hold the ranch together themselves. And that's when the structure shifted for good. In 1936, the Tejon Ranch Company was incorporated as a public company, with the Chandler and Sherman Group retaining a controlling interest. The land had moved from Mexican grantees to a naval officer to a media dynasty to a publicly listed corporation, and through all of it, the property had never been subdivided, auctioned at tax sale, or broken apart. None of that movement shows up on the public listings most people watch. The Chandler family's Times Mirror company sold its stake in 1997, and by then the company already traded on the New York Stock Exchange. According to reporting by Yahoo Finance and Simply Wall Saint as of December 2025, institutional investors hold approximately 55% of Tejon Ranch company shares outstanding, with hedge funds accounting for roughly 14% of that total. The reported largest shareholder is TowerView LLC at approximately 14% of shares. A separate aggregator, Wall Street Zen, reported in August 2025 that Wesley Capital Partners held approximately 26%, which conflicts directly with that figure. Both numbers come from secondary financial aggregators, and any precise claim should be verified against SEC Schedule 13F filings before being treated as settled. What this means in practice is that the largest contiguous private landholding in California, assembled piece by piece from 19th century Mexican grants, now answers to the same quarterly earnings calls and shareholder pressure campaigns as any other company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. In May 2025, an investor group called Glenbrook called on Tejon's independent directors to allow shareholders to call special meetings. The ranch that survived federal land adjudication, a near foreclosure, and a century of consolidation is now navigating activist investor pressure, which is a genuinely strange thing to type about a property that predates California statehood. But here's the thing. The story isn't static. Roughly 12,000 of the ranch's 270,000 acres sit in northern Los Angeles County, and Tejon Ranch Company has spent years working to develop them into a community called Centennial, planned for up to 19,333 homes, including more than 3,000 affordable units. The Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors approved the project in December 2018, and environmental groups including the Center for Biological Diversity and the California Native Plant Society filed suit shortly after. Nick Jensen, Conservation Program Director for the California Native Plant Society, argued publicly that this model of development is simply wrong for the 21st century, pointing to wildfire risk from fires that have burned through the area multiple times in recent years. Supporters of the project offer a different reading. Tejon Ranch Company voluntarily agreed in 2008 to permanently conserve 240,000 of its 270,000 acres under an agreement signed with 5 major environmental organizations, and that conservation area includes critical habitat for the California condor, one of the most endangered birds in North America. Company Vice President Barry Zoller has noted that those conserved acres store an estimated 3.3 million tons of carbon. The 12,000 acres proposed for Centennial represent about 4% of the total holding. In June 2025, the California Court of Appeals upheld the lower court's ruling on the project, with Tejon Ranch stating it prevailed on 20 of the 23 items resolved at trial. The project continues to move forward. The ranch is not an abstraction from a distance. The 500 acres that became the Bakersfield National Cemetery, opened in 2009 and later designated a national shrine, came from a donation by Tejon Ranch. The town of Grapevine, visible from the highway, sits on land the company owns. The water moving through the pump plant on the property helps supply Southern California. The result is private land functioning as infrastructure, controlled through a share registry rather than a deed, by investors who may never set foot near the Tehachapi Mountains. The ownership paradox. At the center of all this is genuinely unusual. A 270,000-acre estate built from Mexican land grants during the Rancho period, consolidated by one officer, absorbed by a media dynasty, and converted into a public company, is now influenced by whoever currently holds the most shares, none of whom need any connection to the land to shape what happens on it. The Centennial case is still working through the system, with additional filings expected, and that will be covered here when the next one lands. The broader story of Harry Chandler's land holdings across the American West, including his involvement with the Owens Valley Aqueduct and developments from Baja California to the Tejon, is its own subject, and a considerably longer one.